I'm really excited for David Bajt's presentation on his project at Wasl Dome at Expo Dubai 2020. David, thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Thanks, everyone. So if you missed it earlier, I'm David Bajt. I'm the co-founder and director of Bild Studios. And yeah, I'm here to talk about some rather exciting projects, I think, which we did for the Dubai Expo 2020 inside the Wasl Dome. And this is sort of between the years of 2019 up till, I would say, recently, actually. But before we get started, let me just show you a little bit what we do as a company. We're essentially a company made of technologists, artists, engineers, producers, and we specialize in producing large-scale visual experiences, video installations. We also have a virtual production studio over in West London called Mars Volume, but that is for another talk, another day. This movie here next shows a little bit of some stuff we do. All right. Interesting jitter in that video, I have to say. All right, so I have a pretty packed schedule here of my presentation. I'm going to run through 4 different projects. The first one is the content pipelines for the Wasl Dome. Then I'm going to go into the VR visualizer, which we created for the in-house Expo team. Then I'll go into the broadcast augmented reality we produced for the opening and closing ceremony for the Dubai Expo. And finally, I'll run through the interactive experience, essentially turning the dome into the world's largest audiovisual installation. That is my little agenda. I'll just go straight into it. The Wasl content pipelines. Essentially, what I mean with content pipelines is the ways, is the workflows you create content for the dome. Is the only way you can create content for the dome. And I should say the reason why we got involved in this project in the first place is because our friends at CT Middle East had won this bid as system integrator for the space, and we were then commissioned by them to handle this particular part of the project, which itself then led to loads of other opportunities working directly for Expo later on. So just a little bit of background information about the dome. It's really sitting at the center of the whole Expo area, which is absolutely huge. You can call it, generally it's referred to the beating heart of Expo. It's an absolute monster. It's 130 meter wide by 130 meter wide and 70 meters tall, and it was the place for 173 shows during these 6 months of Expo, including the opening and closing ceremony. And it was over 25 million visitors that went through this space during these 6 months. So jumping straight into sort of our task, if you like, there was many tasks. I'm not going to go show absolutely everything, but the main core task was creating these pipelines and the templates and so on. The first template the client wanted was the so-called bespoke template. And with this bespoke template, you should, as an artist, be able to trace the graphics perfectly along the structure of the dome, the so-called trellis. So what you see here to the left is in red is highlighting this trellis structure, and to the right you see the sort of an artist's impression from Expo. This is probably an image that was made sort of back in 2017 during this sort of entire RFP process. That was sort of the main big task. The second one is they want another sort of what they called template, 3D immersive. I wouldn't call it template, I would call it a workflow. There was a lot of debate about the naming of this. Anyway, it's called a 3D immersive. And this is essentially a way of turning the dome into a massive virtual window into a virtual world. And this essentially allows 3D graphics to flow seamlessly around the dome. The next one was the spatial maps that would allow picture-in-pictures, PIPs, to be added as a second layer on top of the background graphics, and that would allow for sort of camera feeds, keynotes, or any sort of external sources to play back content into the video system. There was loads of other things that was included in our to-do list. There was things like LED mapping. There's actually 3,600 LED points embedded into this trellis structure. You know, how do you map those things up? We had to find a way of automatically map up those LED points using the same video content. There was a lot of work just finding the right lineup methodology using disguised omnical cameras, for example. There was a lot of discussions, sort of scientific reports that made about the hard drive space for these servers on site and so on. We also made a lot of test content just to verify our own workflows that they're working. But I'm going to go into the hardcore bits. First of all, there was a couple of things that had been decided already before we joined this party, if you like. It had been decided that there would be 252 40,000 lumen projectors for this installation. And these 252 projectors are distributed in 42 different pods. You can see them there on the bottom right. Just for your awareness, these pods are pretty big. They're 3.3 meters tall each. And just as a reference, a 747 jumbo jet engine is 2.7 meters. So, you know, that's the size of these pods. And they're housing essentially 6 projectors each. So everything here is triple stacked, I should say that. So yes, it's 252 projectors, but it's actually 84 unique HD channels. Still quite many, I would say. It had also been decided that 16 disguised GX2 servers would be deployed. Now, this is specified back in 2017, if you like. So there was no GX2C, there was definitely no GX3 out there. So hence the reason why it's a GX2 specification. So again, it had been decided that there would be 2 GX2s assigned as director and director understudy, 11 actors, and these 11, the number 11 is really key to my entire sort of presentation because all our workflows is based around these 11 regions, which we'll talk to in a bit. So just for your, so you might already know, each GX2 server has max 8 HD outputs available. So if you take 11 times 8, we have in total 88 outputs available, which is obviously more than enough for our 84 HD channels, which we need to cover. And then we have 3 understudies assigned to kind of replace those 11 actors. So to even start creating these templates, we had to do a lot of analytics work and technical creative engineering before even going on creating those templates. So we took this Houdini file that was sent to us with all those 84 channels embedded, and we essentially replicated all that entire simulation they've done, and we brought it into Mapping Matter, which is this fantastic production simulation software. And in Mapping Matter, we could analyze things like brightness levels, pixel sizes, we could look at blend zones, and we could sort of verify that these other people during this so-called Chicago workshop had done their things right, if you like. So we can see here that you can see how the brightness levels change as you come further and further up onto the dome. One crucial thing, which is also like analyzing, just kind of finding some form of resolution of this dome, and we realized that the projectors are distributed according to a 16 by 6 grid of projectors. So that led to a total resolution of 27,000 by 6,000 pixels. So that's the native resolution of the dome. Other things which was going on in the background, obviously in parallel, is the whole 3D aspect. Always when you work with architectural projects, you will receive, I'm sure you have, many of you received 3D files from architects. There's always too much stuff in there. It's every nut, every bolt, everything is in there, or it's just a little bit wrong, a little bit dirty, a little bit just not working for us. So this is how it looked like when we received some of these 3D files, and we just had to basically retopologize, recreate everything ourselves. So once we'd done that, we then had to we came to the stage that we now need to unwrap this dome into some form of, template. I'm talking particularly about this bespoke template, task number 1. So how are we going to do this? Like, what's the way we should tackle this problem? But now we need to think about these 11 different actors which we have available. So essentially, we need to find the most effective format for slicing this template up into 11 different regions. So the question is a rectangular way the most efficient way format, or is it a circle way? It's like a fisheye way. And it was pretty obvious after just a couple of seconds even that we have to go for this equirectangular format, which is essentially created by having a 3D spherical camera inside the center of the dome itself. So we sort of established this UV-based template, if you like. That's the most efficient way of keeping all the lovely pixels in there, because obviously slicing up a circle like that wouldn't be very, very efficient. So we can now start to do something very, very simple. This is an After Effects file, which we, the first version. At the bottom right, you can see some very simple early on test content, and inside the After Effects environment, we placed out 3 different cameras, because you can actually do that in After Effects, see content in 3D. And just that first proof of concept, really, that, yeah, okay, it does seem to work. You can see our template there, and it maps correctly onto the dome in 3D. But then we have to go, we really have to think about this content slicing. That is like one of the big challenges here. Like, how are we going to slice this up into these 11 different regions? Essentially, we need to understand how these projectors and how these media servers are represented in this format, in this UV space. So what we did was to assign each one of these 84 outputs to a GX2 media server and color code them. So everything in brown there, you can see at the bottom, that's from Mapping Matter. All those projectors in brown represents actor number 1. Everything in yellow is actor number 2, and so on. So we then decided to bake these colors into the UV map itself to understand how these regions are represented in UV space. And you can then see here that actor 1 in 3D looks like that, but it represents that area in the UV space. And with that information, we could really start to define these regions pretty clearly. And if you then bring this template, the same template, but with these regions back into the same After Effects environment, you can actually see that, okay, now we understand how these media servers are represented onto the dome itself in 3D, which is pretty cool. So this After Effects file automatically split up these 11 different regions into 11 different files, and then they were then mapped onto the correct coordinates in this feed map inside the skies. Obviously, each file is only copied to its relevant server. So actor number 1 file obviously only goes to actor number 1 GX2 server, because hard drive space is really, really crucial here. We need to be extremely effective. So essentially, if you then blend all these things together, you will form one unified canvas, as you can see there, bottom right, or here. Here's basically the first. Okay, I'm back. All right, so this is the first version of the Disguise project that was created. So we're getting somewhere. Like, I think we almost actually, I would say, have achieved the first task, the bespoke template. You can clearly see these red outlines and the cyan panels. But then, if you go into this bespoke template, it's actually not that nice to work with as an artist. Do you really want to work with panels that are not circular? These panels in real life are circular, but in this template, they're not. So, I mean, if I would be an artist, it's not the nicest thing to do and trace things, for example. I'm talking about 2D artists in particular here. So what we did was essentially we unwrapped, so we unstretched this template using Nuke, into this format, which we call linear. So instead now 2D artists could work in this almost square format. The circles are almost square. It's a lot more square than, or circular, sorry, than before. So this essentially, we found a way of essentially letting them work in this format, and then that would automatically convert it back to this format, because you have to end up in this format before the system slices it up into 11 regions. We also actually, when we started submitting these templates and these workflows to the Expo team, we got some feedback, and there was actually quite a few artists out there in the world who did want to work in this fisheye way. So we let them do so, and we did that by introducing EXR files that would essentially allow you to convert between the different formats. So one 2D artist can work in the linear format, one can work in the fisheye format, and then these EXR UV maps would allow you to convert from one thing to another. Because, as I said before, you have to end up in the bespoke template before the slicing happens. That's sort of the end destination, if you like. So we're now getting somewhere. This 2D workflow is starting to kind of shape up, if you like. But one of the problems with 2D is that, especially when you work in a dome, is that things like a triangle looks triangular in your template, but when you map it onto the dome, it just looks completely distorted. It just doesn't work. Distortion is a massive issue when you work with 2D graphics in a dome. The second problem is that there's always a start and end to a canvas in 2D. So basically working in 2D is somewhat limited. It's perfect for things like tracing and traditional 2D graphics, but if you want to create a seamless 3D effect, you will be very limited working in 2D, which is obviously why we had to figure out this 3D workflow, the 3D immersive system. The beautiful thing here is really that the way we created the bespoke template in the first place is using a 3D camera. So essentially, the 3D camera would generate that bespoke template anyway. So in a way, we got it for free, if that makes sense, which means that we now have a 2D workflow and a 3D workflow running in parallel. We have the linear 2D way, we have the fisheye 2D way, and we have the 3D workflow, which would spit out that bespoke template format, which then would be sliced up into these 11 files and then distributed to these servers. And essentially, there is one After Effects that just handles all this stuff for you. It's a very, very advanced After Effects file. It actually also includes the LED points, as you can see there. So we had to figure out how these LED points were represented in this UV space as well, which required some custom coding and some fun stuff. But yeah, this After Effects just handles everything. It just does all this slicing. It also handles things like naming convention and proxy creation, which is extremely important for this installation. If the names are wrong, and it's a very, very long and convoluted naming convention going on, you will not be allowed to ingest content into that installation. So this is all work that was basically done back in 2019, and I was, I guess, blessed myself to go to Dubai early on while Al Wasl was still a construction site. This is in November 2019, and we did the first projection test onto the dome. In fact, most of these panels weren't even installed yet, so we had one little patch of panels which we could test on. We had our workflow pretty much wrapped up, at least the 2D and 3D was sort of on its way, and we could just kind of sort of verify it as well, which is a great opportunity for us to do so. Mainly it was a projection brightness test for others, but it did get opportunity to test our workflows, and it actually worked really, really well. We also did some test content ourselves in 2D and 3D, and it popped in really, really well. I was very, very pleased about that. And you can't see the smiles on those very important people there, but they were extremely happy to see this working. Because obviously, we talk about 252 projectors. If those projectors aren't bright enough, this is a serious amount of cash that's been spent on, not enough brightness, if you like. So yeah, they were very, very pleased. A couple of months later, actually on New Year's Eve, 2020, they called and said, you have to come to Dubai in 2 weeks and install the entire dome, which is just insane. question, but we did it. We came to Dubai, we essentially created a team pretty quickly, and we had the opportunity to install everything, which was just a fantastic opportunity for us to test these workflows. And again, this is the test pattern which we've been working on since the inception of this project, and just to see it map up, and it was mapping up really easily and really quickly, actually. It was just a fantastic, very pleasing moment. And here you can see those pods in action. I have a picture later on which you'll see the scale of this thing, because it's very, very difficult to see how big this actually is. And we all love these technical test patterns, so here's some more. There was also, during that test event, we were giving some content, so we obviously submitted our content pipelines by now, and a company in Sydney, Artists in Motion, made some test content based on our templates and our workflows, and it looked really, really good, actually, I have to say. Here's another little quick look, and here's a little snippet from this VVIP show that was made in January 2020. So all in all, these pipelines worked, and the event went really good, and it was a great sense of achievement, I would say. And here's that photograph I wanted to show you earlier, actually. But this is the scale of things. That is the size of a human being. So yeah, it's kind of crazy. There's loads of video clips of this installation online, but I found this clip from BBC Click, which I found the most sort of entertaining one, if you like. So here's that one.
When the sun goes down, the expo really comes to life. At the heart of the action, the Wasl Dome. And if there is an Eiffel Tower of Expo 2020, this is it.
I've found myself saying this a lot when I've been in Dubai, but honestly, this is the greatest projection I've ever seen.
All right. So that was a little bit of an overview of the Wasl Dome. Thank you. Thank you. So we had these pipelines up and running. All these projects I'm showing you is actually running a little bit in parallel. There's not like one thing after the other, really. But we had these pipelines up and running, and it worked really good. The Expo team were happy. Content teams around the world who started to produce content using the pipelines seemed to enjoy them, and they were working well. However, we had to find a way, the client wanted to find a way to previs the content in a really effective way. Because let's face it, as you've seen, it's really, really hard to perceive the scale of this thing, and the only real way of getting it is to see this in VR. So I'm going to do a little quick run through of the process of creating the Expo visualizer for the client. So they had this idea of, as I said, view the content at scale, and the only way to do that is in VR. They also wanted to be able to navigate around in VR. And essentially, it's a projection content visualizer. So you should be able to swap out the content on the fly inside this application. You should also be able to change the time of the day in this application, because the lighting conditions are quite different. Early days of the evening, so 6:30 when the sun goes down, versus midnight. So it does create quite different lighting characteristic, and they wanted to visualize that. Another massively important thing is that you should be able to, make us a PC application with no requirement to have Unreal Engine or Disguise or any of that kind of stuff installed. It should be super, super easy to install and use on any PC. But for those people who doesn't want to even do that, this application should be able to render the view into a 360 YouTube VR format, which any client around the world can look at. And one of my favorite features which was created was the live video input, which allows you to essentially run video from an external source via NDI and get that mapped up into the dome. I'll show you a little screenshot of that shortly. So I'm going to be quite brief here about this project, but essentially this is the 3D models that was sent to us. We had a great little Unreal team headed up by Cameron, sitting here in the audience. Well done, Cameron. He took all these 3D files, and we realized very, very soon that absolutely everything has to be recreated, retopologized. There's also no textures involved or supplied to us. Instead, we were sent things like drone shots they made for us to, so we can understand the texturing, the materials, the physical materials that's going on in this space. An absolutely beautiful piece of architecture, as you can see. So we decided to do this Unreal Engine, mainly because the system just handles lighting really, really well, but also it's extremely easy to create a standalone XE app from Unreal and build sort of your custom UI and so on. So it became an Unreal application. And I'm just going to jump ahead a couple of, well, the whole process of creating this visualizer wasn't actually more than a month and a half. So this is after approximately 1 month into the process, which I think is rather impressive. This is the morning view. Here is an afternoon view, and you can see how the lighting has changed. And here is a view from the nighttime, and you can now see this projection content being mapped onto the dome. We also replicated that same drone shots you saw just a second ago inside the visualizer, and this is how that looks like. So yeah, I'm rather pleased with that. I think you guys did really well, Cameron. Well done. But what is a piece of application without having a great functionality behind it? It needs to be easy to use. So the clients they had looked at some previous menus. I don't think it's the best, most efficient, definitely not the prettiest UI here, but this is what they wanted. And this UI, which we built, allowed you to obviously swap the video files out, hit play and stop and loop, and so the standard kind of stuff. You could also change from nighttime to daytime to morning time and so on. You can change the flags of these flag poles. You can change the camera settings, go from VR mode to screen mode, because obviously you can also use this application as a normal screen mode type feature. You can also change the content of this garden LED, this full of LEDs in the garden, so you can change the content there. You can change different UV formats of the dome, and you can then render to screenshots or to YouTube 360. And you can also apply a bunch of different effects, things like adding architectural lighting design, adding smoke, adding show lights, and so on. So it's actually more than just a video visualizer. So yeah, that was pretty cool, I think. And then, yeah, as I said, one of my favorite features is this. You can literally, straight from After Effects, pipe your content in without even rendering it via NDI straight into the application and see your content live on the fly. That was pretty cool, I thought. And here's the little 1-minute video showing the end result.
The VR visualizer is an Unreal virtual Al Wasl environment, which was commissioned by Expo and made by Bild Studios.
You can view your production content in VR, you can add lights, you can change brightness levels, you can step around there and truly understand how this production content would look like in that space, and even during different times of the day.
It's kind of become the backbone of our creative studio. It allows our motion designers to preview content in a virtual version of Al Wasl in real time over NDI, which is really a game changer for their content creation workflows. They can understand the scale or the placement of content, and they can do it in a photorealistic Unreal environment, which is pretty amazing, and helps them understand what their content is going to be like when it actually arrives at showtime.
So that's that. We're now going to head into slightly different territories. We're going to talk about the broadcast augmented reality we did for the opening and closing ceremony. Particularly the closing ceremony is what I'm going to focus on here. So obviously AR is a completely different territory. We're now in the world of real-time graphics. We're now in the world of track cameras and kind of different service systems and infrastructure. And in general, it's quite a different thing to do. But we've been working with quite large AR installations in the past. The biggest one is probably this one, which is the PSL opening ceremony back in Dubai in 2019. This was using Notch, tracking cameras using Stipe, and we created all the content and all the bits and pieces. So that was sort of a great learning curve from us. This is back in 2019, so the Disguise software wasn't as developed as it is now, obviously. So there was a lot of hacking going on, but it was, from a learning point of view, it was great to have this project done before going into these Expo projects. We also done quite a lot of AR back from sort of 2016 and onwards. And here's the thing, I think Lewis showed this, the Ellie Goulding music video at Mars back in 2020. And this is sort of where these terms, front plate and back plate, and those sort of terminology started to appear, right? And yeah, sometimes I show this image because this is what it's all about when it comes to AR, VR, XR. You have to essentially look at your graphics from the same point of view as you painted it from. This is an artist called George Roos who based his entire career on this concept that, if you step a couple of meters aside from this point of view, you will ruin that effect. And the same goes for AR, or as I said, AR or XR or what have you. So you guys in this audience know about this already, but in order to achieve a successful AR show, you do need to have a camera tracking system in place. We've used all of them. We used Stipe, we used Moses, we used Race Logic, we used NCAM. They're all good. They're doing different things, different applications. You need a real-time engine. There's been a lot of talks about Notch, about Unreal, and so on. There are others, of course, out there as well. You need a server solution. There's been talks about Disguise here today. Sometimes we obviously use that a lot, but we also use our own server solution, which we build ourselves. And there are other media servers out there who does this kind of stuff. But above all, and this is the real reason why I'm showing this slide, is that you need a great team, right? You need a great creative team who are very technical. You need a great technical team who understands creative. You need a great production team that just glues all these things together. But you also need a very responsible client. You need a client who understands your needs when it comes to scheduling, logistics, the need for us to doing things like calibrating lenses prior going on site and so on. And you need that client to be really feeding the right information to their other partners, things like the broadcast department in particular. So communication is absolutely key when it comes to these AR shows on the largest scale, because without the communication, things will start to go badly, I would say. So as a company, I suppose we provide quite a lot of leadership when it comes to these big, large-scale events as a whole, in particular when it comes to the AR broadcast installations. So now I'm just going to go into the closing ceremony of the expo. This is our client here is 5 Currents, and the production content creators are, again, Artists in Motion, which I mentioned before. So us 3 are talking actively in the lead up for this event, and they started sending these kind of artist impressions over to us fairly early on, and you might wonder, okay, cool, what is AR here exactly? So in fact, what AR is these God rays you see there, because the entire concept behind this show is to be really, really subtle. It's sort of adding a dimensionality, if you like, to the existing production contents. It's not like they want to create this flashy, big, bold AR objects popping out, but rather actually being really, really subtle, almost like photoreal VFX style piece of content. If you wouldn't notice it, it's probably a good thing. It's a good thing. It just adds this extra layer. Here's another example when, what's AR here? Well, AR is actually the volumetric lights poking up, because with the physical, remember I said it's 70 meters tall. You cannot possibly have physical lighting reaching that far. But with AR, you actually can. And now you can start to see this is a little bit more obvious AR shots. The hands are AR. This is something we actually never created. This star here, this God ray coming down, is also AR. And I think Lewis showed some of this stuff. Here's early concept sketches, a planet, obvious an AR effect, but also all these particles and stuff is all AR. And yeah, here we are again. Notch versus Unreal. Again, we use whatever. That's the best thing for this particular job. We use Unreal daily in our virtual production studio Mars, but we also use Notch all the time. It really comes down to what the client and what this production needs. This particular case, having done the opening ceremony, we understood that flexibility, agility, speed is everything. That is so important. We need to be able to change the content on the fly, directly in front of the clients, because this particular installation, we only had access to the site after midnight, up till 7 a.m. in the morning, because the expo is open. During daytime, it's just people in that dome. We cannot be there, so we only have access to the dome after midnight. So speed is key, and I have to say Notch is actually pretty good at that sort of things, especially when it's coupled with Disguise. So it became a Notch Disguise GX2C job. And the same way as we built a visualized for Unreal, Lewis already showed this, but we built that visualizer. Lewis and his team who did this job did a great job in building the visualizer, and now we can start to visualize not just the AR, but also the video content on the projection itself. So you can really see those two layers adding up. I'm going to gloss this over really quickly because Lewis spoke about it, but the whole content production was obviously a huge part of this entire process. Lots of back and forth. The guys at Arts and Motion sent a lot of 3D models. This goat it became a thing because I think we did literally 89 different versions of the goat, and you know it was pretty cool. But yeah, one of the things with Lewis and the way he does content is that he builds systems. It's not necessarily building content, it's building systems, and the output from these systems is content. And what I mean with that is that, for example, this God ray effect, we sort of understood that, we sort of guessed a little bit what the client would ask us, and one of the things they probably would ask us is, can you just add sort of more fingers to these God rays? So we built the functionality just adding more fingers or moving these God rays along the edges of the dome rather than in 3D itself. So we've tried to build these content systems in Notch as flexible as possible, knowing that we had so little time on site. From a technical point of view, I think Lewis stole my slide here. But I'll say it again, we had 6 cameras tracked, all at 4K. We had 2 jibs each side of the dome. We had 1 hot head PTZ camera, which we tracked. We had a dolly camera, which is running left and right, close to the middle stage. And then we had 2 cable cameras running left, sort of crossing the space itself, which was, the tracking there was provided by the French XD Motion guys. And everything else was tracked using Stipe. So once we have this technical spec in place, we can start to, and sorry for this incredibly speedy thing, but essentially we started to build all these technical drawings, and these drawings are essential to understand what we need to supply and also what we need to quote for, to be fair. But these drawings is also like the language. This is how we communicate, even how we want our rooms to be laid out, our control rooms and our seatings, our tables and our chairs and all that kind of stuff. Everything is just plotted down into drawings. And with that information in place, we can start to building the racks. These are the GX2C racks. I think it was 10 of them for this particular production. And obviously, we always make sure that we carefully test the Notch content or any other real-time content, if you like, on the actual real hardware that intends to be going on the show. That's super, super key. We need to make sure that the content is running 50 FPS with no jitter. I'm now jumping like a couple of weeks ahead. We're on site now. We've been on site for a little while, for 2 weeks, I believe. We now reached the point where we want to be from a technical point of view. We have lined up all the cameras, which all the cameras are up and running in terms of tracking. You can see here that we're now glued the AR virtual dome onto the physical dome, which is the ultimate test pattern test. If that works, anything is going to work. It's a great feeling when that just pops in. It's a lot of work just reaching to that point, but you know, ultimately at some point you will get there. So well done, Jamie Sancho, technical director, who's just in charge of this. It's amazing work, I have to say. With that in place, we can start to actually do rehearsals. And again, Lewis and the entire operations team can start to replace these test content with real creative graphics. And as I said, we guessed right. The client kind of did exactly what we thought they would ask for. Change this, do this, and so on. Absolute natural questions, no problem. And it's about, again, being really agile, really flexible. I think we managed to be exactly that for this production. And then once that's succeeded, this is actually a picture from the opening ceremony, not the closing, but I think it's really quite nice. We had Dandelion Burdock working with us for the opening ceremony. So well done, Dickon and his entire team working on this. But essentially, this is what sort of an end result looks like. This is what we're sending now to the broadcast director, and he can now pick and choose what shot he should take. I do not advise to do this as a busking type show. We should do this on time codes. It should be the same every time because the AR content does look good from specific cameras. So if you're planning to do a big AR show, I would highly recommend to introduce QPilot, which is essentially cutting cameras to time code. That is just an overview. I'm going to show you 1 minute end result of this show. that's that. All right, I'm going into my final project, which is the Al Wasl interactive experience. And again, this is turning the dome into the world's largest audiovisual installation. So by now, this is actually something we worked on almost in parallel with everything else. But we did at this stage, sort of during 2020, we got to know the dome pretty well. The clients knew quite a lot about the issues with ingesting content and so on into the dome. So there were really two reasons for doing this installation. The first reason was that the client were interested in creating an immersive experience for their VVIP guests that would allow them to essentially interact with the dome using some form of touch interface. It wasn't settled that this would be an iPad or any of that. It was talks about having a globe or having a kiosk and all sorts of things. So the first reason was sort of a bit of an entertainment-related argument. But almost a bigger argument was actually more completely from a functional reason. We understood now that rendering just takes time for this dome. Even if you're rendering to half resolution, it is still a 13,000 pixel canvas to handle. The content ingests into those servers is fairly slow, and all in all, the content changes is pretty slow, and slow costs money. So let's find a solution instead to do this in real time. That would allow us to change the content on the fly. There's no hard drive space that will be taken up, and obviously with all that, you get basically a really cost-effective solution. So we asked ourselves if this is even possible. If this is possible, we did the initial content pipelines for the pre-rendered stuff, and that was really hard. So creating these pipelines and for a real-time driven solution, almost sounds like a quite daunting task, really. So we decided with the client to split this up into two projects, if you like. The first one being completely pure, like a technical feasibility study and a creative exploration. If we would succeed with that, we can then move on into the more creative stuff, develop our creative further, adding audio design to this, because I haven't really mentioned this, but there is a 27.1 channel audio system in this dome, which is insane. And obviously, we decided pretty early on that this would be a touch interface using an iPad. So, if everything would go well, we would also go and develop this touch interface using an iPad and how that integrates into the whole solution as a whole. One requirement to do this was to, just because they want an interactive solution, it didn't mean that we can just roll in with new servers and new infrastructure and all that kind of stuff. We had to utilize what's already on site, which is these lovely 16 GX2 systems. So it was pretty obvious for us to specify Notch as the real-time engine, purely due to its sort of integration, well-established integration, I would say, with Disguise. So it became a Disguise Notch show again. We did have to figure out a way to actually map the real-time content onto the dome in the Disguise project. So in the same way as for the pre-rendered content, we had to split up the rendering across these 11 different GX2 actors. And we were then looking at some stuff we worked with these AR workflows. This is about 2020, when we worked on this. So AR was sort of a thing, and XR was becoming a little thing, and we started to look at perhaps one server can be assigned one camera, essentially. And that's exactly what we did. We placed out 11 different cameras inside Notch, one for each server, and then we essentially reprojected these cameras back again onto the dome from the same point of views inside the Disguise project. And then what happens here, we have these 11 different point of views, each for one camera each, and when you put them together, it turns into one unified canvas. So we're doing this now in 3D instead of 2D, if you like. So the theory was there, but we couldn't really verify that this would work unless we tested it on real hardware, the actual hardware that would be on site. So we had this GX2 service in our office for quite a while. I think it was 12 weeks. And it became a little bit of a science class, I have to say. We started to test performance and sync regularly in the office. A bunch of these servers was also at Lewis's house. This is the deepest COVID period. It was crazy. And yeah, essentially, as I said, science started. We started building these type of movies. Here's a very, very simple, but very crucial Notch technical test. So what you're seeing here is essentially an output from one server and the output from the adjacent server. So if these propellers wouldn't sync, we knew that we would have a problem, and we had to fix it somehow. So for every piece of content we did in Notch, we had to go through this kind of sync and performance tests very, very carefully. But we also had the opportunity, as we did some other bits and pieces in the Dome, to test this. I think this is 6 a.m. in the morning. We did a very, very quick test of this, and it worked, and it was just fantastic feeling that actually, you know what, this is going to work. Now we just need to make this nice and pretty as well. So that was really, really cool, that moment, I have to say. So having verified the base technical stuff, we had to start to figure out, you know, this touch interface. And here's an early concept we did. It's really quite straightforward. You load this interface. You're being presented with different thumbnails. Each thumbnail represents one treatment. You click that button, and you will be presented with additional sliders, buttons, color palettes, etc., etc. And this is probably kind of the hero interface, is this view here. This allows you to track your fingers onto this 2D representation of the dome. And what we're doing here, we're extracting the coordinates from your fingers in this 2D view, and we are sending those coordinates to Notch that then does something creative out of it. So I'm going to show you a very quick clip showing Lewis in action doing exactly this. So this is early on, one of the first tests we did. We had just figured out how to sort of extract these coordinates and map it to Notch. And again, all these little things was just a nice little achievement, and we just, yeah, it felt good. But one thing we also did, which perhaps in hindsight was a little bit too much on the top, we actually made a really sophisticated backbone to this entire interface, almost like a CMS web system. In fact, the interface is a web design. We built a CMS backbone system, and that would allow the client to adjust number of buttons or sliders, or even build their own entire looks and treatments. So this kind of disconnected the whole. We had a coder to just purely work on this, and this disconnected him from the creative team. So the creative team could just build their own sliders and buttons without actually incorporating his time. Another quite cool thing we utilized is the new feature from Disguise called indirections. And this essentially allowed us to ingest content on the Disguise server without the need to update the app at all. These thumbnails from the content in Disguise automatically just appeared on the touch interface. And I think this here shows early tests showing how we're swapping out textures from a web interface that goes into Disguise. So we're getting there in terms of technical. We now start to focus a little bit more on the creative. Here's an early sort of ripple test look, which I thought looked quite nice. Here's another one, which is growing plants, all in real time. You're dragging a slider from left and right, and you're growing these plants on the trellis, which I thought was pretty cool. We did about 25 different treatments, all in all. Another thing which I think is worth mentioning is that everything wasn't connected to the app, to the in-touch interface. There was a lot of looks that was just running straight in Disguise without any form of interactive app. Here's an example. These are the so-called flags look. And because we had so many countries active in this space, right, we could basically, the Disguise operator on site could just swap out the flag himself every day without the need to render any new video content. So I think it's just a great example of a really cost-effective piece of content creation. We then bolted on audio. So again, 27 speakers plus subwoofer. We had Gareth Fry doing audio for us, and we essentially, the way that worked is that as you drag your finger on this interface in the app, you extract these coordinates, and we're also sending these coordinates to the Lisa L-Acoustics audio system that then maps it to the closest speaker in the dome. And that means that you have the graphics and the audio running in parallel next to each other, and it really creates this rather amazing immersive experience, I would say. We went on site, and technically speaking, we knew that it would work. There's a lot of colors and lots of tweaks that had to be done. Lewis was there for a week or two, I believe. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to make it myself, but Lewis and Jamie had loads of fun. Here's our client, Amna, to the right, and she was so pleased with this and so taking of it that she called her best friend the Prince of Dubai to say that you have to come and test this. It's pretty cool. So that was, I thought it was like a proof of concept. It worked. And generally, now when using the app, there's a lot of smiles. There's Harrison testing it out for the first time, and it's just generally a very enjoyable experience. I'm going to show you this little video here that sort of summarizes everything we did.
We are producing the largest interactive projection surface in the world.
It's that first magical moment where you take your finger and you put it on the iPad, and then you move it. And then immediately you see something happening. There's almost no latency. You actually feel like you are physically touching the dome.
The technical challenges for the Al Wasl interactive installation were quite vast. Just real-time content on the world's largest projection surface was an issue. We rendered 6K in each node, and we had 27K across the entire canvas.
We've integrated a full surround sound audio. Wherever you place your finger, audio will come from that perspective.
You as an individual feeling so minuscule against this huge structure, but having such huge power over it and feeling the effect of that power is incredible, really.
Being able to control it instantly on real time, I think we just jumped 50 years ahead.
I'd say thank you so much. Thank you.